Sleepy Z's Masonry Studio presents Think Big with Michael Zellner, powered by Platinum Jewelers. Joining me today for part two of his podcast is Bill Courtney. Just a reminder, Bill is the CEO of Classic American Hardwoods, which has been in business now for over 22 years. He's an author and a motivational speaker, and his company has offices in Memphis, China, and Vietnam, and has annual sales of over $45 million a year. We talked a lot about his early years in this company in part one. And part two, we're going to be focusing on Bill being featured in Undefeated, which was an Academy Award winning documentary that came out in 2011. A little bit about his book that came out in 2014, Against the Grain. And most recently, his amazing show that he launched this past summer called An Army of Normal Folks Podcasts, which is already in Apple's top 10 worldwide. Worldwide. And he also was just featured. He actually was a guest on The Way I Heard It with Mike Rowe, which I listened to, and it was an excellent podcast. So I'm excited to have him on again. Bill, welcome back.
Thanks very much. You always do your homework, Michael. I appreciate that.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. You telling me that too. You know, I know from doing a lot of research on you and listening to your podcast that you don't do what you do to get recognition for yourself. However, you have received a lot throughout your career. You know, there's a lot we can talk about, but I thought one of the most important ones I saw was you were inducted into the Bridge Builders for Leadership in Diversity, Community, and Justice in 2011. To me, that says a ton about you and your character. Share with us a little bit about what Bridge Builders is and what that induction meant to you.
Oh, I mean, it was a high honor, really. And that whole thing has evolved. And ironically, I interviewed a guy named Manu Meal for An Army of Normal Folks only a month ago. He lives in San Francisco. He flew in from Chicago, interviewed him, and then he flew right back out. And what Bridge Builders, which is now kind of Bridge USA, has morphed to for my world is what Manu does. And briefly, what Manu is a kid who spent half his life growing up in Delhi, India, and half his life in the United States. His mother is a doctor and his father is a scientist. And as he would put it, so I'm not being weird here, he would say, we're very, very typical Indian immigrants to the United States. Education matters. We work hard. We end up being doctors and scientists and stuff. And he identifies himself as an average student. And he went to Cal Berkeley, which is, a well-respected higher institution of learning, but it's also known for protests.
Right.
At Cal, they'll protest protests. They'll protest everything at Cal.
Yeah.
And most people think because of that it is a 100% very far alt-left, liberal, progressive institution, but it is all walks of life that go to Cal. And Manu's kind of middle of the road kid. And his freshman year, which was 5-6 years ago, the college Republicans at Cal invited a very right-leaning speaker. And the protest that started as a result of that guy coming to campus were massive, larger than anything since the civil rights era. People were killed, people were hurt, damage was done, parts of the campus burned. And they found out that the vast majority of the people that weren't protesting, the vast majority of people doing the damage weren't even Cal students, weren't even students at all. They came from the outside. They saw an opportunity to come in, get incendiary. And anyway, the campus had to cancel this guy's speech because it was that bad. Helicopters flying over the whole thing. And here he is as a freshman, and he's like, the irony of ironies, the very campus that in the 60s protested and fought for free speech is now the very campus that shut down free speech because a segment of people didn't want to hear what a guy from the far right had to say. And he's like, the irony is it's flipped on its head. And through that experience, he and some other folks on campus got involved. And we're talking Republicans and Democrats, progressives, conservatives, centrists, Jews, Hindus, Christians, people from all walks of life joined this group that is now called Bridge USA. And their goal is to have open forums where people from all walks of life come together and voice their opinions, their thoughts, their fears, their goals. And they do it from whatever position they come from in a group of very diversified thinking young people, and just do it in a non-threatening way. And I would like to say civil, but civil is not a word they use. They're like, bring your ideas, bring it hard, but we're not going to fight over it. We're going to discuss it. And through it, it builds bridges, because once you understand a person's perspective and where they come from, then you may understand why they react one way or another to different things in society. And once you understand and talk through those things, you can build bridges. It does not mean you give up on your fundamentals, but it helps you to understand someone else's fundamentals that builds bridges. And this thing is now on, I think, 17 different college campuses and now 20 different high school campuses.
Wow.
And it's specifically designed for young thinking people to exchange ideas in a non-threatening way that allows for growth and bridge building. And I think that is a phenomenal piece of work, because it is exactly the polar opposite of what our current national media and a lot of what comes out of DC does. It is open, free discourse, speech, assembly. Excuse me. It is the basics of our democracy at work among young people. And so when you ask me what bridge building means to me, that's what it means, is diversity, inclusion of all kinds of speech, inclusion of all kinds of schools of thought in a non-threatening way where we seek to bridge the gap of misunderstanding.
I take it his goal is to obviously continue to get this on more campuses and high schools all across the country.
Yep. And he works tirelessly. And it is an amazing thing to see a kid who's been through high school, two kids, one who's been through high school, call it in the Midwest in a more conservative area, and another one who comes from, Berkeley or California. And they show up to Cal Berkeley, or they show up to campus with these preconceived notions because of the way they've grew up and the vacuum that they grew up in, frankly. And then they get to this area in college where now you're encouraged to think critically about your own thoughts, but also others' thoughts. And then you join these people in a room together to share those thoughts, not necessarily change one another, but just understand one another. And I just salute young people being willing to do that, because that does bridge the gap of misunderstanding, which leads to what's so much of what ails us in our society today, in my opinion.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's what an amazing thing he's doing.
Yeah, it is. So when you ask me what bridge builders mean, going back to 2011, culminated in exactly this: young people building bridges of thought through free expression, open and safe.
How has your background, growing up in Memphis, influenced your involvement in community service and always wanting to give back?
Man, I mean, people may or may not know, but Memphis has always been one of the most philanthropic cities in the country. There are, you think about the names of people in our city who have done things like the Hyde family and the Hyde Foundation and Southeast Asset Management, and all those guys have done through the Poplar Foundation, and the AutoZone and what that family, the Hyde Foundation, has done. And then you think about the Wilsons, who built Holiday Inns, and the Wilson Family Foundation, and the at the Baptist Hospital, the maternity ward is named after the Wilsons because they donated. And then you think about the
I
West.
drive by there every day and see their name up there.
Well, there you go. That's
Yeah.
a Memphian. And you think about West Cancer Clinic and Bill West and the amazing things he's done in our city, and just name after name of people who are from Memphis who have chosen to dig in and invest here, that have made hundreds of millions of dollars, that could live anywhere, that could do anything, but they continue to give back to this community to try to improve it. I just look at those people, and they are my mentors. They are the people that I think the most of, because so many people could do great things and leave and take their money and go do other stuff, yet they continue to invest in Memphis. So I think with that illustration of not only how to succeed in business, but what to do with that success in terms of giving back to the community that supported you grow your business, is it's been really inspirational to me. And as such, I just feel like, I'm not saying it's not wonderful what people do when they go to other countries and go on missions and build orphanages or whatever, dams and Cambodia and Laos, or all the things people do, I think is wonderful. But for me, I just don't think we need to travel halfway across the world when there's so much need in our own community.
Absolutely. Let's talk a little bit about the documentary Undefeated. So it came out in 2011. It goes through your career as head coach at Manassas High School here in Memphis. And for many of those people that, don't live in Memphis, Manassas is not located in a high economic area of the city. And many of the people that live around the school face a lot of challenges. Tell the audience how this all got started with Undefeated, came about, that ended up turning into something that was just beyond amazing.
I coached football and taught school for a living when I first graduated from Ole Miss. My whole plan was to get my doctorate in developmental psychology. And I got married, and we had 4 kids in 4 years, and $17,000 a year trying to go to school and raise a family wasn't getting it. So I got into the private world, but coaching was always my passion. My coaches meant so much to me growing up, as we discussed in your first segment we did. And so in the state of Tennessee, the TSSAA, our governing body of sports here, says you can be a full-fledged coach, not like a helping dad, but what's called a certified non-faculty coach. If you go to Nashville and you take all these classes and you pass these tests, you get this accreditation. So I did that because I wanted to continue to coach, even though I couldn't do it as a living. But I wanted to be a everyday, all day coach, not like a helper guy, and so I did all that. So I always coached for 31 years straight, all the way through, even while, in business. And when I started my business in North Memphis, I was broke, and I bought the cheapest industrial property I could find, and that happened to be a mile from Manassas, and a really dilapidated area of our city. And a guy that works for me, who happened to be a fraternity brother of mine, was helping the baseball team over there. And they started spring practice, and the coach was kind of overwhelmed, didn't have any help. And he mentioned to that coach. The coach knew who I was, and they asked me over to help for spring practice. That's how it started. And I went to Manassas because it was convenient, because it was close to where I worked, and I could manage the time of running my business and going over there. And that 2 weeks of spring practice, I found 17 kids who'd won 4 games in 10 years, or a program who'd won 4 games in 10 years, only had 17 kids on the team, but some kids that really wanted to be part of something good. And man, I've never been so energized as when I showed up over there and saw these kids' willingness and want to just anything positive. And so that 2 weeks of spring practice led to 7 years at Manassas.
Wow. How did Undefeated come about?
So that was our last year. And going into our last year, O.C. Brown was being heavily recruited by everybody because he's a freak. And I say that in the most wonderful terms. He's a 6'3", 300-pound kid that could run a 4.8 40. Was ambidextrous. He was good on the basketball court. He was just an unbelievable physical specimen. And as we started to win, he got more and more looks. And one of my assistant coaches, who's one of my dear friends, Mike Rowe, who played at Arkansas State, started putting up some YouTube videos of some blocks and some things OC was doing, which were phenomenal. And that even fed more interest in OC. And the Commercial Appeal did a story about him. And this is when Lane Kiffin just took the job at Tennessee.
Okay.
And a guy named Rich Middlemas, who's a producer, was sitting in Hollywood, and he graduated from UT, believe it or not, and had this unhealthy obsession for all things UT football, which I think any obsession for UT football is unhealthy, but his was particularly unhealthy. And so he's Googling through all this Lane Kiffin stuff, and there was an interview that said Lane was asked in one of his very first press conferences, what's your first order of business? He said, I'm going to Memphis to recruit players, and one of them is O.C. Brown. And Rich was like, O.C. Brown? So then he Googled O.C. Brown. When he Googled O.C. Brown, the Commercial Appeal article about O.C. came up, and he thought, well, this is interesting. So he called Mike Rowe and then me and said, hey, I'm interested in maybe doing a little short doc or something. I would like to come to Memphis and see what's going on. So he did. And when he got here, he found out the bigger story of Manassas, all the years, all the coaches, all the kids, all the turnaround, everything that happened. And he's like, nah, I want to make a movie. And we're like, what? If somebody said that, I mean, I'm a Memphis guy. Nobody makes a movie. So he leaves, and he comes back three weeks later with Dan and TJ, who are the directors, who at that time were like 29 years old, and they were wearing skinny-legged jeans and scarves, which nobody does in Memphis, which is weird. And the three of those guys start making a movie with borrowed cameras that we think maybe we'll see on channel 385 one Wednesday at 2 a.m.
Right.
They follow us around for 9 months and leave Memphis with 550 hours of film, and they go back and edit. And a year later, we get picked up by one film festival. And 6 months later, I was walking down the red carpet at the Academy Awards.
Unbelievable.
It is unbelievable. It is completely unbelievable and ridiculous.
Yeah. What a story. I mean, think about you just take one element, Lane Kiffin not getting that job, and the whole thing doesn't happen.
And if Rich Middlemas isn't, Googling around, and
right.
If Jason Smith doesn't do an article for the Commercial Appeal about O.C. Brown, and, the whole thing, it's just, it was never sought after or even meant to happen. It just did.
Yeah, absolutely. We see you providing a lot of mentorship and guidance to your players, both on and off the field during the documentary. How did you balance being a coach and a mentor? And, what role do you believe sports play in shaping young individuals today?
Done right, that's the primary job. I have never seen a coach score a touchdown. I've never seen a coach throw a pass. I've never seen a coach make a tackle. Coaches do not win games. Players win games. Coaches win players. So any coach worth their salt, in my opinion, their job is to win the hearts and the minds of the people they're tasked with coaching. And I would say lead. And the way you do that is you understand there's a story under every helmet, and you learn that story. You learn those goals and fears and inhibitions and what makes a kid tick. And you seek to serve that kid. You seek to serve that kid in terms of what they want to have happen in their life after football, what their goals are for football. And you learn the player. And if you learn the player and you have an aptitude in putting them in a reasonable place in terms of X's and O's to win games, and then that player grows to understand that you actually care about them as a human being, but not as a chess piece in your X's and O's, then you have a chance to make a difference on the field, but more importantly off. And I think mentoring And being a point of inspiration for the kids that you coach is the primary function, not the secondary function. But first, you have to understand as a coach, you don't win games. Players win games. Coaches win players. Win your players, and then let them go win games.
One thing that I noticed that I'm sure many others obviously did too, the documentary, it captures the emotional journey of the team striving for success. Looking back, what do you believe was the most significant turning point or defining moment for the team during your coaching tenure, especially that last year?
I think it happened a little bit before the last year. I would say it happened in between the summer of the second to last year when we had seniors. That fourth year, I finally had seniors that'd been with me since freshman.
Right.
Right. So when I saw that rising group of seniors and a rising group of eighth graders becoming ninth graders coming in, and I saw those seniors start holding the freshmen on the team accountable to the same rules that I held those seniors to when they were freshmen. When all of a sudden the senior leadership on the team started saying and acting and employing the same fundamentals that I demanded of them when they were freshmen, that's when it became no more of a coaching job, but a culture. The culture changed. When your senior players start engaging in the tutelage of the rising freshmen on the team, the way you did with them back when they were freshmen, now you've got a culture change, because now I'm not having to hold everybody accountable. The team is holding itself accountable. And now the things that we were trying to instill in terms of culture were not something we were instilling, but it was installed. And now it was a function of the way we acted. One of the things, for instance, I used to say early on was, we're going to go win this game, but I don't want to just win the game. I want to win the game. I want to win the referees. I want to win the stands. I want to win our fans. I want to win the other team's fans. I want, when we walk off that field, for everybody inside that stadium to say, "Dad gum, that was a good football team." But more importantly, look at the way those kids handled themselves. I want to win the hearts and minds of everybody that sees us when we go out on Friday night. That took a long time to get really instilled. But when I hear freshmen being told by seniors, we're going to win the game, but we're winning everything, boys, and this is how we're going to do it, and holding those freshmen accountable, those standards, you've changed culture. And when culture change and you have a positive culture, the wins are pretty easy.
I bet you had, when you noticed it for the first time that it was happening, it just had to, inside, maybe outside too, just put a big smile on your face.
Yeah, because it made my job easier.
Yeah.
I wasn't having to be a taskmaster 100% of the time. I had a group of 15 kids that I knew were going to be servant leaders to the young kids coming on the team that understood how winning happens, not only on the football field, but in life.
Right.
Are you shopping for a new watch, an engagement ring, any kind of jewelry at all? What's up, Memphis? This is Jaren Jackson Jr. from the Grizzlies, encouraging you all to shop where I shop, Platinum Jewelers here in Memphis. Platinum Jewelers has a big selection of earrings, stockable rings, luxury watches, necklaces, bracelets, really whenever you need. 9387 Poplar next to Fresh Market in Germantown. So if you need anything jewelry related, go to my spot, Platinum Jewelers.
You said, quote, "My philosophy on coaching doesn't start with X's and O's. It starts with believing that players win games and coaches win players," unquote, which you just talked about. I've always believed that sometimes people can fool others for a little while if they're not genuine, but eventually those people, they figure it out, the truth on whether or not someone cares about them as a person. Tell us what that quote means to you, especially the last part where you say, coaches win players, and how you feel that you were able to do that.
Consistency is one of the big ones. And what I mean by consistency is, yes, you got to be there every day. Yes, you got to repeat the same fundamentals and tenets you expect every day. But you have to be consistent in accountability as well. And accountability means holding your players accountable to the rules. But more importantly than that is you have to be accountable to yourself and to your team in the way you illustrate those fundamentals. How can you sit there and talk about teamwork and how can you sit there and talk about character and how can you talk about commitment if you're not showing that in the way that you act every day? You demonstrate and illustrate through the way you carry yourself, interact with the people in your family, in your business, in society, on your team, in the school administration, with your other coaches, with everybody, the very fundamentals you're talking about. And you be extremely consistent in that, in your demonstration, illustration of the tenets that you hold the kids accountable for. You hold yourself accountable to illustrating them, so that when you do go to hold your kids accountable, they don't think they're looking at a fraud. And if they're not looking at a fraud and they say, I know he means this stuff because this is the way he lives his life and it's worked out for him, then you're illustrating to them how to lead life, and therefore you start winning them. And I'm telling you, it's just like that culture change we're talking about. Once you win your players, once you win the culture, once you win the thought process, once you win the accountability piece, once you win that entire culture, winning on the field really does become easy because those kids are playing for something greater than just a game.
One of those fine young men is Chavis Daniels. And I know that man, he loves you and definitely believes in you. And I had the opportunity, luckily, to have him on my podcast last fall. Tell us what he means to you.
Oh, my gosh. Chavis had every reason to be a statistic. He was in a gang. He got locked up for 14 months. He was angry, aggressive, had a chip on his shoulder, was just hard to deal with. But there was also, when you were one-on-one with him, you saw a really decent side to this kid. But he couldn't get out of his own way from his anger and all his hang-ups and everything else. And so to watch him evolve while he was playing for me, from this impetuous, angry, really self-centered human being to a guy who adopted that very culture we're talking about and started putting his teammates before him and started playing for something other than himself, was enough. And then to know that now, as a 20-something-year-old father who's now investing back in North Memphis and putting his energy and effort into kids from North Memphis that were just like him so they didn't end up on the wrong path. I mean, that's just phenomenal. So what he means to me is an enormous sense of pride for what that kid's done for himself and verification that the things we talk about really do work and change lives, and a sense of restorative faith in the human spirit and the ability to change and do great things regardless of where you come from. It's just not where you start, it's how you finish.
Right. You mentioned this, and I can't imagine the feeling, what it was like for you and your team to win the Academy Award for Undefeated for Best Documentary Feature, back on February 26th of 2012. That's exactly what happened. What was the feeling like for you, but most importantly, those young men, at the Manassas Tigers?
I mean, it was awesome, right? I mean, first a movie, then you don't think anybody will ever see it. Then it starts getting some chops, and then you win the Academy Award. I mean, it's phenomenal. And for all the kids on the team, it's a video yearbook of a really special year that we all shared. Having said that, when I got back to Memphis, one of my big things that I kept saying to everybody is, it's awesome and it's to be celebrated and we should all be proud, but it's just a moment in time.
Right.
I would have been a failure if the greatest thing to happen in any of these people's life was an award for a movie when they were 18 years old. If that's the pinnacle and it goes down from there, I've screwed up. It just needs to be something that we're proud of, that's a moment in time, that we've enjoyed, but that doesn't define us. And so while it was awesome, it was fun, it was great, and everybody should really be proud of their participation in it. And without all of the hard work of the kids, that movie never gets made.
Right.
And we all have to acknowledge and have fun with it and love it. But at the same respect, can't define us, just a moment in time.
Quote, Courtney goes against the grain of today's me first culture while explaining why these time tested principles are needed now more than ever. He shows that winning isn't just about the score at the end of the game or the profit margin. Ultimately, it's about the impact you make on your fellow human beings and the legacy you leave behind, unquote. That was said about you by Brian Burkhart of the New York Times after your book, Against the Grain, A Coach's Wisdom on Character, Faith, and Family and Love, came out. What inspired you to write that book?
So after the Academy Awards, I was doing all these keynote speeches all over the place, and I'd still do them. And I kept getting told afterwards, man, where is all this stuff? I want to read it. I too much. I couldn't take enough notes. I'm like, I don't know. I mean, that's the speech, right? And they're like, well, you need to write a book. So my agent came to me and he said, I really think you need to write a book. And I said, well, I don't know how to write a book. And I said, yeah, you do. All the stuff you talk about, just write it in a book. So I guess the inspiration from the book came from really the content of all the speeches I was doing and culminated a bunch of the information and stuff I was talking about. Along with, I'm an anecdotal storytelling guy. And so a lot of it's chock full of stories of people that I've interacted with in my life who've I've coached or coached me or who I've worked for or have worked for me or whatever. And anecdotally use those relationships and stories to illustrate a particular fundamental or tenet that each chapter is talking about, which is exactly how I do my speeches. And spent about a year putting that thing together and then released it. So that was the inspiration behind it. And listen, it's sold really well. It continues to sell really well.
Awesome.
And that's all cool. But that's really one of the best compliments is that book is used as the text in 20 or so master levels courses in universities across the country.
Amazing.
Has had in the leadership section of whatever their syllabus is. And to me, that's probably the biggest honor, that young graduates who are getting their master's and MBA or whatever and are talking through their leadership portion of that master's thing are using my book, or professors using my book, to talk about different kinds of leadership. To me, I mean, that's probably the biggest compliment I could ever get from the book.
We all face challenges and failures throughout our lives. There's no way to grow as a person, without them. And I believe that, every single book that I've read on success, and anyone who is eventually successful in life has those challenges and has probably failed many times in one way or another before they're successful. I mean, many examples of that in our society. Colonel Sanders, I believe, was in his mid-60s before Kentucky Fried Chicken took off. Yep. How have you handled those in your life mentally and emotionally? And what always seems to keep you persevering and very determined person?
Oh, man. I'm a guy that Wow. Hang on. I'm sorry.
You're
I'm
okay.
about to sneeze. I got a sinus infection. Hang on. All right. I'm a guy that there's in every race you run, there's a tape. And like in a 50-yard race, you run as fast as you can, you run like hell, and you hit the tape. In a marathon, you pace yourself, you speed up, you slow down, but eventually 20,004 miles, whatever it is, down the road. I've never run a marathon with my fat rear end, so I don't know how long they are, but they're 24 something. You cross the tape and you end. And once everybody crosses a tape, they've run the race. The race is over. And then you rank yourself according to your finish, right?
Right.
But when you're running the race, the rank doesn't matter. It's when you start and then when you end. So as long as you're in the race, you got a place to finish first. You got a chance, right?
Right.
Okay. Well, in the marathon of life, there is no finish line until death. I mean, you just don't ever stop running the race. There is no tape, which means you're always in the game. You're always in the race. It doesn't matter if you're last place. As long as the race is still going, you still got a chance. There is no finish line. And I approach life that way. I was a good student in school. I was not the valedictorian. I lettered in 6 sports in high school. I was not the best on any of those teams. I was good. I started in all of them, but I wasn't the best. I have a business that will do almost $80 million this year. We do business in 42 different countries, and we do a pretty good job in my company. But we are not the best. There are much bigger hardwood lumber companies in the United States. They're also much smaller. We're pretty good, but we're not the best. But I can tell you this, there wasn't a single day that I went out in high school playing sports that I didn't go to improve and try to become the best. There wasn't a single day that I didn't want to move my rank up in high school or college in my GPA. And there's not a single day that I want to grow this business and make it better because I'm in the race and I want to keep moving up in the rank. And, along the way, there's a housing crisis in 2008. There's COVID. There's 9/11. There's things that come along that hit the economy. Right now, things are not great in our economy, especially in building and lumber. So there are setbacks. You stub your toe in the race. You get tired. You get winded, but you're still in the race. So as long as you don't let those little stumbling blocks convince you that you're not still in the race and there's still a way to keep going, you just keep running that race. So I just believe if you really approach life every day with the understanding that there simply is no finish line, and no matter what happens, as long as you have breath in your lungs, you're in the race and you want to keep moving up, run the race.
Those $45 million in sales have actually grown a lot there. If you're at 80 now, that's just spectacular.
They have. They have grown, and we've been very, very blessed. And every year we do things to try to improve the business, improve our efficiencies, improve our margins, improve our volume, and be more valuable to the marketplace. This year we'll probably go back from that number because of the market and the economy. That's okay. We're going to keep running as hard as we can, and we'll try to eclipse that $80 million next year.
Ebbs and flows.
That's it.
Yeah.
Stay in the race.
I love that. An Army of Normal Folks podcast is what you call on your website the movement and podcast that can change everything. You said, quote, "Our country's problems will never be solved by a bunch of fancy people in nice suits talking big words on CNN and Fox, but an army of normal folks just deciding, hey, I can help," unquote. I love that. 1,000% agree with everything you already have going on in your life. Family, work, volunteering, you have yourself a big oversized plate, Bill. But there was something inside of you that motivated you to start an Army of Normal Folks podcast. Tell us a little bit about that.
You're right. My plate is ridiculously full, and I'm kind of an idiot for taking on another project because at 42 years old, it was one thing. At 54 years old, I'm freaking tired, dude. I'm in the race, but I'm exhausted. I did an interview with a guy out of Chicago after doing a speech, and I said that very thing. That he asked me, "What do you think's going to fix it, the proverbial it?" And I am really sick of the divisive crap coming out of our national media. You can watch Newsmax, Fox, CNN, and CNBC covering any event, and it's like you're on 4 different planets.
Yeah, I turned it all off. I don't watch any of it anymore because of that.
It drives me nuts.
Yeah.
Well, you can also listen to a political approach to any issue. Call it the border, inflation, China, Russia, now the Israel-Palestine thing. And you can listen to representatives of our government, duly representative of our government from the Senate, the White House, or the House, from 2 different sides of the aisle describe what's going on there politically. And it is literally like 2 completely different things are going on.
Yeah.
And it's dawned on me that I think it's pretty apparent that there is an enormous amount of power and wealth in our political class and our national media class. And the way for those folks to retain that power and continue to grow that enormous wealth is to craft narratives that divide us. That's how they get their
Absolutely.
And ironically, like sheep, the vast majority of us listen to those narratives that we most agree with, put blinders on, consider nothing outside the lanes of what we believe because of what we've been told, and we just follow down that path. And we've gotten to a place, when I was in high school, it was a prevailing thought was, I may vehemently disagree with what you have to say, but I'll defend with my life your right to say it. Now it's, I vehemently disagree with what you have to say, and you're my enemy if you worship different, think different, vote different, love different, any of that. We've now been separated in all these damn subcategories that are divisive. And then here's something interesting. Pew Research says that 81% of respondents, this is a big thing they did, 81% of respondents say that the information that we get off social media and the national media, 81% of Americans say that the information they get is slanted toward one viewpoint or another. 81. We can't agree on anything, but we can agree that we know, regardless of if we're right, left, whatever, we know that the information we get out of the national media and social media is slanted. Okay?
Right.
Yet, these same respondents say that 88% of those people who know that the information they're being fed is crap, 88% spend a minimum of 3 hours a day either reading social media or listening to national news outlets. So here it is. We know it's crap, but we force feed the crap down our throats every day. It's why I say we're sheep. We know it's wrong, but we sit there and infiltrate our brains with it on a daily basis, further dividing us, even though we know it's crap.
Right.
That is wrong. We are sheep. We are being led to our own cultural slaughter by the very people that make billions and control enormous power because we give it to them by being sheep. And I'm sick of it. So I said that in this interview. And they came back and said, we love what you're talking about. Would you like to do a podcast? I said, well, what's a podcast? And so they told me. I said, sure. So what I do is go around interviewing average people that you've never heard of that are Black, white, Asian, Latino, male, female, Christian, Jewish, Hindu, agnostic, gay, straight, who gives a crap where you come from. that are doing extraordinary things in their corner of the world. Donating photography to families who've lost children, who are cops that are inside tough areas, that are getting out of their cars and doing real community policing. People who've lost children and are starting philanthropic endeavors for children who came from the same place their children came from. People who are a guy who was a 24-year felon who finally decided there was a better way, and he started a reentry program in Las Vegas. The recidivism rate in the United States for reoffense is 70%. People that spend 9 months going through his program, the recidivism rate is 6. Wow. He's changed reentry. Wow. Every story is just different, telling all these stories of all these people who are just normal folks from all walks of life, who are seeing areas of need in their community and filling it, just being a normal person they're not part of some NGO. They're not some A-lister in Hollywood. They're not some rich person who's been tabbed to give away the money. Just normal people doing extraordinary things every day, exacting some measure of positive change in their community. And here's the thing. If you're a white Christian conservative and there is a gay Latino progressive in some place in this country who is serving his fellow man and is making a positive impact on people who desperately need it, you all of a sudden really don't give a crap how they vote, how they think, or how they love, because you can just celebrate the good that they're doing in their community. And if you're a California gay Jewish guy who's watching a white dude from Memphis coach football, who's doing something good in his community, you know what? You don't care how I worship or vote or how I think.
Right.
You just appreciate what I'm doing in my community. So would it be interesting if we had an army of Americans, an army of normal folks from all over the world, putting aside all of the mess that comes out of DC and New York, and just celebrates the goodness that we're all doing for one another? And in doing so, build a community of very diverse people who really don't care anymore how you vote, how you worship, how you love, or what you think, but rather just care about the service and the leadership and the activity you are taking in your corner of the world, because that is something we can all celebrate. That, back to your first question, can build a real bridge that can help fix the proverbial it in our culture. That is what an army of normal folks is about. It's what its purpose is. We put out episodes every Tuesday, and they're edited, they're well done. We want them to be entertaining. We want you to laugh. We want you to cry. We want you to be entertained. It is an entertainment venue, but most importantly, we want you to be inspired. Every guest shares their personal contact information. So if you listen long enough, you're going to hear something that you're passionate about, that you have a skill or a discipline in, that you can match that passion and discipline with an opportunity in your area of the world. And you will have a blueprint of how to do it from the story that you've heard. And you will have a mentor that you can contact from the person who told the story.
Yeah, right. So give that their email addresses.
There it is, so that you too can get involved. So an Army of Normal Folks is a show to be interesting, entertaining, inspiring, and hopefully a movement to get people to start seeing people for their humanity rather than for the categories that the people in DC and New York like to put us in.
You said, quote, every city has 4 or 5 streets where you say, this is not where I want a flat tire. And there's a segment of society that sees the disenfranchisement and thinks, gosh, somebody ought to do something about that. They think that their sentiment matters. You know, my suggestion is tilt the rearview mirror about 40 degrees and say, I ought to do something about that, unquote. Why do you think there's so many people, and we know this, that are afraid to, quote, put themselves out there and, quote, and do something about this in many other situations too. And they just keep their mouth shut.
It's scary and it's uncomfortable. And I understand that.
Yeah.
After Undefeated, I got asked the question all the time. I'm so inspired by what you did. I love what you did. I would love to help. How? And, frankly, you go across the street. Well, okay, but I get fears. I get people's fears. I get people's inhibitions. I get people's self-consciousness. A lot of people think, who am I? What can I do? I love that. And I'd love to be able to do something, but what organization do I have to get involved in? And then, oh my gosh, you got to join this organization. And it's hard. It's hard for people to have a level of comfort, a level of confidence, a level of temerity, all of it. And I really do understand that most people's hearts are very well intentioned, but getting off the couch, going across the street and getting out of your comfort zone and out of the vacuum of thought that you've surrounded yourself in is very difficult for most people. And I get that. So I think that's answered your question. So why? The problem is I've never really had a good answer for that before in Army of Normal Folks, but now I do. Here's the answer. Listen to an Army of Normal Folks. Be entertained. Eventually, with the diverse cast of stories we're telling and the diverse things that people are involved in, you will eventually hit. There's a thing called Now I Lay Me Down to Sleep, the CEO of which is a lady that lost 5 children at birth. Okay. One of her most prized possessions is on her second child's stillbirth. She and her husband and that child had pictures. Now, when I first heard this, I thought that's grotesque. You're taking pictures of dead babies. Until I saw the pictures. They're well done. They're shadowed. But that was a baby that woman carried. She says he had curly black hair and dimples in his cheeks. Oh. Even though he never lived, he lived inside her. And that was their child. And one of the biggest areas of trauma for young parents who've lost a child is they can't describe their child to anybody. And they forget what the child looks like. And they had a child, and 3 years later, they have no memory of their child. Well, they started this thing called Now Lay Me Down to Sleep, which is 7,000 volunteer photographers at the ready across the country, that when any young couple goes in to have a baby, if they have complications or they lose a child, they call the photographer, and the photographer goes in to this couple and takes tasteful, well-done pictures of the family, of the couple and their child, so that they can have them for the rest of their lives to remember their child by. It's called Now Lay Me Down to Sleep. When I first heard that story, I was like, wow. But here's the thing. All you have to do is be a photographer and want to give some of your time. You call up Now Lay Me Down to Sleep. They put you on the roll. You get a call. You go in. And can you imagine the satisfaction of being able to serve a young couple in maybe the most traumatic day of their lives, right, and be able to give them something that they'll cherish the rest of their lives? That's just one story of an Army of Normal Folks. But the point is, I'm not a photographer. I wouldn't be good at that. I listen to the story. I'm definitely entertained. I'm definitely inspired. It's never something I'd do, but it might be something a photographer would want to do. Right. Well, every week it's a different story of things like this. So if you listen long enough, you're eventually going to hear something. You be entertained, enjoy it, be inspired, think wonderful. But eventually you're going to hear a story about something that you have a talent at, that you're passionate about, that there's an area of need. And then you too can become an Army of Normal Folks. You too can get involved. So the question you asked me was, why don't people do it? Fear, don't know how, don't understand, self-consciousness, all of it. What an Army of Normal Folks does is seek to remove those barriers so normal folks can do extraordinary things in their corners of the world.
I have just a couple more questions. Are you okay on time for just a few more minutes? Okay, great. Sure. Thank you. You've had some amazing guests on your show. One in particular that I followed online for over a year is Officer Tommy Norman. He's called the Michael Jordan of community policing. Very popular, 1 million followers on Instagram, over 2 million on Facebook. For those that don't know who he is and what he's done in the community in North Little Rock, share a little bit of, if you would, with the audience about what he does and what you enjoy most about having him on your show.
Another perfect example of an army of normal folk. There's nothing more normal than Tommy Norman. Grew up blue collar, I think 6 sisters, had to fight for 10 minutes in the bathroom every day. I mean, and just this great guy. And he always wanted to be a cop. One of the reasons he wanted to be a cop is his great uncle was a cop, and the squeak of the patent leather gun belt and shoes when he walked across, he remembered that as a kid, and he got a beat that was a low income beat, and his goal is to be invited into the people in his beach yard, then to be invited on their porch, and then to be invited in their house. Because once a cop is invited into a house, he is now involved in community policing.
Yeah.
So what this cat does is he parks his car and he walks his beat and he plays basketball with the kids.
I've seen those awesome videos.
He gives candy out to the kids. He knocks on doors. He gets the cell phone numbers of everybody on his beat and he calls them on his off day, 4 or 5. Doesn't call everybody. He calls 4 or 5 a day, but rotates it through. Hey, it's Officer Tommy Morning, just checking on you. You doing okay? And he actually develops a personal relationship with people on his beat. And now, when his patrol car rounds a corner, kids don't scatter and run from him. They flock to him. Literally, there's 20 kids crawling over this guy. He goes and plays basketball with them. He goes to their birthday parties, both on and off shift. He takes their pictures. He posts positive things kids are doing in their community on his Facebook and his Instagram. And just know that he did all this after having a heart attack and after losing his own daughter to an overdose.
Oh, my gosh.
Right. He did all of this. You know why? Because he's a normal guy. Normal people have money problems, family problems, trauma, health problems. We don't do things in our community because we're the pretty people and we get tabbed. Rather, we do things in our community despite the troubles we have in life. And Tommy is a perfect example of perseverance despite the things that are going on in his life, where he gives of his time and his effort to his community. And, he's a cop. He has to chase down bad guys and arrest them. Yeah. There was a murderer, a guy who defended himself, but had a murder charge, and the cops were looking for him. And he called the police department. He said, I want to turn myself in, but I'll only turn myself in to Tommy Norman. And Tommy Norman went and arrested him and picked him up. So why did that guy want to do that? Because he trusted that he was going to be treated like a human being, because Tommy Norman has spent 15 years on that beat, treating people like human beings.
Great story.
It is a perfect example of what, this buzzword of community policing, and everybody's talking about, social justice and what do we do to fix it? Tommy knows the answer. It's very simple. Develop relationships with the people that you seek to police. Hold them accountable. Let them understand you're not going to turn a blind eye to the law, but you're also not there to arrest them. You're not there to make their lives miserable. You're there to serve them. You're there to protect them. You're there to be for them. And if anything gets out of round, you're going to do your job, but you have a relationship with the police inside your community. And he is the Michael Jordan of policing. He has changed lives.
Amazing. You said, quote, "It's just you and me feeling the need, normal folks doing what they can in their corner of the world and their community. And if each of us does this, we could change the trajectory of the country. It's almost too obvious, and yet we have to take the first steps," unquote. Obviously, there are a lot of steps, but as you said, taking the first one is key. In your opinion, what do you believe the first step would be in making positive change and in turning things around?
looking yourself in the mirror and recognizing that doing something nice for someone who isn't as fortunate as you is not just a good thing to do. It's a requirement of the blessings you have. If you were in a better position in society and life socioeconomically than someone else, you have a requirement to look for places to try to give back. Yeah. And I mean, you don't have to start a 501c3. You don't have to coach football for 7 years. You don't have to start these big NGOs. You can read, you can teach adult literacy classes one night a week. You can find ways to serve. And so the first step is recognizing that we have a requirement, that we're required just as human beings to understand that whatever blessings we have are gifts. And you're pretty stingy if you do nothing but take. You got to give back. And then thinking about your talents and your passions, and then looking for opportunities to employ what you're good at and what you're passionate about. Because if you're good at it and you're passionate about it, then you will be effective in the holes that you see in society and fill them.
You know, in part one, we talked about your wife, Lisa. I believe you guys have been married, 31 years now. And you talked about you have 4 children together. Tell us just a little bit about them to finish up and what they brought to your lives.
Maggie is engaged and 28 and living in Montana. And yesterday went on a hike in the backcountry by herself, and her mother wanted to kill her for doing that. She got caught in a big rainstorm. Maggie and David, her fiance, are out there. She is one of the sweetest, kindest souls on the face of the planet, and we couldn't be more proud of her. Molly is living in Dallas. She is 27, and she is trying to decide if she's going to go to law school or get her doctorate in psychology and figuring it out. She's great. She's a ball of fun. Will is 26. He's in Washington, D.C. He is the chief of staff for Congressman Kustoff's congressional office and is doing beautifully.
I grew up with David.
Okay, well, Will's his chief of staff.
Wow.
And then the last one, Max, is 25. He's living in Atlanta, working for Memphis-based Nexair, has a sales territory out there, is doing well. Our children are, this is going to be a weird word maybe, but delicious. They have been the source of so much pride and so much happiness and richness in Lisa and Ma's life. And there have been times that they have been simultaneously the biggest pains in the ass on the face of the planet. But that is parenthood.
Yeah.
And honestly, they are my legacy. They know how their mom and dad think. They know the values and the fundamentals that we share. They know they know what we expect from relationships and family, and they know they know the value of carrying yourself in a certain way. And as I see them grow into young adults, I bristle with pride. Each of them are so distinctly different in the way that they think, both politically and socially. All of them think very differently. I mean, when we all get around a dinner table, it's like an argument at the United Nations, but it's hilarious. But ultimately, when it comes down to the fundamentals, that is where the source of Lisa's my pride are, is that we have been blessed with 4 children who care about their community, they care about their friends, they care about their family, and they want to do things the right way. And there's nothing more delicious for a parent than being able to say that about their kids.
And I can guarantee that's a reflection of Lisa and you.
Mostly Lisa.
I'd like to thank once again our sponsor, Platinum Jewelers. They're located at 9387 Poplar Avenue on the southeast corner of Poplar and Johnson Road. Go in there, Preston Hudson and their staff. They take great care of everybody, and they'll take great care of you too. Bill, if you would tell the audience how they can find you and follow you on social media, and also all the different places they can listen to your podcast.
So you can find everything at coachbillcourtney.com. That's speeches, book, podcasts, movies, all that stuff. You can follow me at I am Coach Bill on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, all that. And Army of Normal Folks is normalfolks.us. Normalfolks.us. We're distributed by iHeart, but you can find us on Spotify, iHeart, Apple, wherever you listen to podcasts. And I hope those listening will check us out. With regard to an Army of Normal Folks, it's not about money for me. Trust me. If it's anything, it's a negative right now. But we are getting a large national following. It has been as high as number 10 on the Apple charts, which is humbling and unbelievable. But the more people the more listenership we can grow, the more subscribers we have, the more weekly listeners we have downloading, the larger imprint we have, and the more positive effect we think we can have. So I really thank you for your time and your plug, because we are not growing this because I want,
Sure.
more notoriety. We're growing this because we genuinely think if we grow it large enough, can have a chance to actually have some positive impact. And so I hope all your listeners will check us out.
They should. And also go to YouTube too. There's several little clips on there. I know you were on Clay and Buck and Chris Vernon show and a few other ones that they can check out too, that are on there too, that talk about it. I really appreciate you coming back on for part 2. Like I said, I know you're such a busy guy. You're a great role model, not only for younger people, Bill, but also for people that are our age, and I know your podcast is going to continue to grow, and because it is, everybody, what he said is right. You got to go listen to it because it is really, really good. And you'll walk away from each episode and you're thinking, I'm really glad that I did that. So make sure you take the time to go listen to it, whether it's at home or in your car. It's worth your time. I really appreciate you coming on again. Thank you so much.
I really appreciate you having me, buddy.
Thank you.